The marriage contract sat on our dining room table like a coiled snake. 23 pages of legal jargon that basically boiled down to one thing. Give us everything you own, Ethan, and maybe we'll let you stay married to our precious daughter. I stared at the document while Sierra's parents, Harold and Maureen Blackwood, watched me with the kind of smug satisfaction you'd expect from people who just cornered a wounded animal. Sierra herself sat beside her mother, fidgeting with her engagement ring, the one I'd saved 6 months to buy. "It's really quite standard," Harold said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The man looked like an accountant who moonlighted as a funeral director. Successful families protect their assets. "Assets," I repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "What assets would those be exactly?" Maureen's perfectly painted lips pursed. "Sierra's inheritance, of course. Her trust fund, the family business interests." I almost laughed. Sierra worked in human resources at Morrison Construction, the same company where I managed project timelines and budgets. Her trust fund was about as real as her claims of having modeled in college. "And in return for signing away my salary, my savings, and apparently my right to make financial decisions," I said, flipping through the pages, "I get what exactly?" "You get to marry Sierra," Harold said, like he was offering me the crown jewels. Sierra finally spoke up. "Ethan, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." "Just paperwork." "Right. The kind of paperwork that would make me a financial hostage in my own marriage." I glanced around our modest living room, the couch we'd bought together at a scratch and dent sale, the coffee table I'd built from salvaged wood, the framed photo of us at last year's county fair. Everything here told the story of two people building something together, not one person surrendering everything to the other. "I need a special pen for something this important," I said, standing up. "Be right back." I walked to my truck, pulled out my phone, and did 3 things in rapid succession. First, I Googled Prenup 101 classes near me and texted Sierra the link. Second, I opened my banking app and transferred half my savings to a new account I'd opened that morning. Call it insurance. Third, I took a screenshot of the transfer and sent it to Sierra with the message, "Found my special pen. Thanks for the inspiration." My phone buzzed immediately, Sierra calling. "What the heck is this?" she hissed when I answered. "Insurance," I said. "Funny how paperwork works both ways." "Ethan, get back in here right now." "Actually, I think I'll pass. Tell your parents their contract needs some revisions, like maybe the part where they think I'm an idiot." I hung up and drove to the Anchor, the dive bar where normal people went to forget about abnormal problems. Joe Martinez was working the evening shift, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of someone who'd been listening to other people's troubles for 20 years. "You look like a man who needs whiskey," she said as I slumped onto a bar stool. "I look like a man who just discovered his fiancée's parents think he's a walking ATM?" Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Joe poured 2 fingers of bourbon. The Blackwoods always were a piece of work. Harold used to come in here before Sierra's mom reformed him. Talked a big game about family money, but I happen to know he drives a 15-year-old Camry and clips coupons. "So, the trust fund thing is about as real as my chances of dating Brad Pitt?" Joe leaned against the bar. "But here's what's interesting. Sierra's been coming in here lately, not alone either." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "Blake Harper, real estate guy. They've been having what you might call intimate conversations in the back booth." Blake Harper. I knew the name. Slick-haired pretty boy who sold overpriced condos to people with more money than sense. The kind of guy who wore cologne that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and drove a BMW with vanity plates. "How intimate?" I asked. Joe's expression said everything her words didn't. Let's just say they weren't discussing property values. I finished my drink and left a 20 on the bar. Outside, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic texts from Sierra. I ignored them all except the last one. "We need to talk. This is serious." I texted back, "Finally, something we agree on." The drive home gave me time to think. Sierra's sudden interest in a marriage contract that would give her complete financial control. Her mysterious late-night phone calls that she claimed were work-related. Her new habit of going to the Anchor, a place she'd always claimed was beneath us. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. I pulled into our driveway to find Harold's sedan still parked out front. Through the living room window, I could see the 3 of them huddled around the coffee table, probably plotting their next move. Mr. Tibbet, our elderly neighbor, was watering his garden with suspicious enthusiasm, clearly hoping to catch some drama. I waved at him. "Evening, Mr. Tibbet. Beautiful night for eavesdropping." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Just tending my tomatoes, Ethan." Sure you are. I headed for the front door, then stopped. Hey, Mr. Tibbet, you might want to pay extra attention to who comes and goes around here, neighborhood watch and all that. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Mr. Tibbet lived for this stuff. Inside, the War Council looked up as I entered. Sierra's eyes were red. Whether from anger or tears, I couldn't tell. Harold had loosened his tie, and Maureen clutched her purse like I might try to steal it. "Look, Ethan," Sierra started, but I held up a hand. "Let me save us all some time," I said. "The contract is insulting. The trust fund is imaginary, and if you want to treat this marriage like a business transaction, you'd better bring better terms to the table." Harold stood up, puffing out his chest. "Now see here, young man." "No, you see here." I kept my voice level, but something in my tone made him sit back down. I've spent 3 years with your daughter. I've watched her lie about everything from her college GPA to her dress size. I've listened to her complain about money while she spends $200 on shoes she'll wear once. And now I find out she's been having cozy drinks with Blake Harper while planning to financially castrate me. Sierra's face went white. "How did you—" "Small town, Sierra. People talk." I looked at each of them in turn. "So here's my counteroffer. You can take that contract and use it for kindling. I'll keep my money, my dignity, and my freedom to make my own choices. In return, I won't tell everyone at Morrison Construction that our HR manager thinks marriage contracts are standard business practice." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, Maureen spoke. "You're making a terrible mistake, Ethan." "Maybe," I said, "but it'll be my mistake to make." They left without another word, Harold clutching his useless contract like a security blanket. Sierra lingered by the door, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize, might explain, might give me some reason to hope we could fix this. Instead, she said, "You'll regret this." "Probably," I agreed, "but not as much as I'd regret signing that thing." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and stared at my phone. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 2 voicemails I had no intention of listening to. I turned the phone off and opened a beer. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out exactly what Sierra and Blake Harper were planning. Tonight, I'd enjoy the silence of a house that finally felt like mine again. Outside, Mr. Tibbet was still watering his tomatoes. Some things, at least, never changed. The next morning brought rain and regret, mine for getting engaged to Sierra, and hers for underestimating how much I'd learned about covering my tracks during 3 years of managing construction projects. You don't last long in that business without knowing how to document everything and trust nobody. I was eating breakfast when my phone buzzed with a text from Mick Sullivan, my work partner and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Mick was the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and profanity, and who'd take a punch for you without asking why. "Coffee at Murphy's. Heard you had some excitement last night." Small towns. I swear gossip travels faster than internet here. Murphy's Diner sat on Main Street like a grease-stained time capsule, serving the same coffee and rumors it had for 30 years. Mick was already there when I arrived, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug that had seen better decades. "So," he said as I slid into the booth across from him, "word is, the future in-laws tried to repo your soul." Something like that. I signaled the waitress for coffee. "How much of the story made it through the gossip mill?" "Enough to know Sierra's parents are even bigger jerks than we thought. And something about you transferring money." Mick's blue eyes were sharp despite his casual tone. "Also heard Blake Harper's been sniffing around your woman." "She's not my woman anymore." The words tasted bitter, but true. "And yeah, Harper's involved somehow. Joe saw them together at the Anchor." Mick nodded slowly. "Want me to have a conversation with Pretty Boy? I speak fluent knuckle sandwich." "Not yet. I need to know what I'm dealing with first." I leaned forward. "How good are you with technology?" "Good enough to know that Find My Friend's app works both ways, and most people don't read the fine print when they install stuff." I pulled out my phone. "Sierra and I have been sharing locations for 2 years. For emergencies," she said. "And now?" "Now I'm curious about her definition of emergency." Mick grinned. "I like where this is going." We spent the next hour planning what Mick called digital archaeology, using the tools Sierra had willingly given me access to in order to uncover what she'd been hiding. It wasn't illegal, wasn't even unethical by most standards. It was just good project management. The plan was simple. Sierra worked late on Thursdays, supposedly catching up on HR paperwork. I'd use the location sharing to see where she really went, and Mick would help me document whatever we found. If she was cheating, I needed proof. If she was planning something worse, I needed to know about it. Thursday evening, I sat in my truck outside Morrison Construction and watched Sierra's little Honda leave the parking lot. My phone showed her location moving toward downtown, then stopping at the Riverside Motel, a place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. Bingo, I muttered, starting my engine. The Riverside sat on the outskirts of town like a guilty secret, its neon sign flickering against the gray sky. I parked across the street behind a delivery truck and waited. 15 minutes later, Blake Harper's silver BMW pulled into the lot. My phone buzzed with a text from Mick. "Got eyes on the target?" "Both targets," I replied. Room 12. "Pictures?" I already had my camera ready. The photos weren't explicit, just Sierra and Blake entering the same motel room, their body language telling a story my marriage certificate couldn't edit. I sent the images to Mick and to a secure email account I'd set up that morning. Then I waited. They emerged an hour later, Blake looking smug and Sierra checking her phone, probably making sure I hadn't texted. I took more photos as they kissed goodbye next to his car, then followed Sierra's location back to our house. She arrived 20 minutes before I did, just enough time to shower and change clothes. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, surrounded by papers that looked suspiciously like actual work. "How was your evening?" she asked without looking up. "Quiet," I said. "Yours?" "Long day at the office. You know how it is?" I knew exactly how it was. "Find anything interesting in those HR files?" She finally looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear? Guilt? Just the usual personnel stuff. Nothing you'd find interesting. You'd be surprised what I find interesting these days. That night, after Sierra had gone to bed, I sat in my garage and went through the photos on my phone. The evidence was clear, but it raised more questions than it answered. The affair was obviously real, but why the sudden push for a marriage contract? What were Sierra and Blake planning that required complete control over my finances? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I screenshotted the message and sent it to Mick, then replied to the unknown number. "Who is this?" No response. I was still staring at my phone when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the garage window, I saw a figure walking away from my truck. By the time I got outside, whoever it was had vanished, but they'd left me a present. All 4 of my tires had been slashed. I called the police, but Officer Martinez, Joe's cousin, just shrugged and took a report that we both knew would go nowhere. "Probably kids," he said. "You got any enemies, Ethan?" "Just the usual," I said. Cheating fiancée, her psycho parents, and her boyfriend who thinks he's God's gift to real estate. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "You want to file a complaint about that too?" "Not yet, but I might." After he left, I called Mick. "They slashed my tires." "All 4? "All 4. "That's not random vandalism, brother. That's a message." Mick's voice was grim. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I looked at my disabled truck, then at the house where Sierra was probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming about whatever future she and Blake had planned. "I'm going to send a message back," I said. "But first, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." "What do you need?" "Everything you can find on Blake Harper, financial records, business dealings, social media, parking tickets, everything, and I need it by tomorrow." "Consider it done." Mick paused. "Ethan, whatever you're planning, count me in. Nobody messes with my friends." I hung up and walked back to the garage, stepping carefully around the rubber debris that used to be my tires. Sierra wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that I'd been managing complex projects for years, and the first rule of project management is simple. Always have a backup plan. And sometimes the backup plan involves teaching people that the quiet guy in the corner might be quiet for a reason. Friday morning brought new tires, courtesy of Mick's connections, and a revelation that made my coffee taste like ash. Sierra was gone when I woke up, another early meeting, according to the note she'd left on the kitchen counter. But her location showed she was at Blake's condo across town. My phone rang as I was getting dressed. Linda, my sister, calling from Portland, where she worked as a paralegal for a firm that specialized in making rich people's problems disappear. "Heard you're having woman troubles," she said without preamble. Linda had never been one for small talk. "News travels fast." "Mick called me, said you might need some legal advice about prenups and adultery." "I might." "Good, because I did some research. Maine is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect asset division if you can prove financial misconduct or waste of marital resources." I sat down hard on the couch. "We're not even married yet." "But you're engaged, you live together, and you have shared expenses. That creates certain legal relationships." Linda's voice was crisp, professional. The question is, what do you want to accomplish? What did I want? Revenge felt too simple, too crude. Justice was closer, but still not quite right. What I wanted was for Sierra and Blake to understand that actions have consequences, and that the quiet guy they'd been underestimating was capable of playing their game better than they were. I want them to face the truth about what they've done, I said finally, publicly. The town's summer bash is this weekend, Linda said. Lots of people, lots of witnesses. If you're going to make a public statement, that would be the place. The summer bash was Morrison's annual festival, a combination block party, craft fair, and excuse for the whole town to get together and pretend we all liked each other. Sierra had been looking forward to it for weeks, planning her outfit and talking about all the people she wanted to impress. Perfect. I need you to do something for me, I told Linda. Can you look into Blake Harper's business dealings? Specifically any connections to Sierra or her family? Already on it. Mick sent me what he found, and there are some interesting patterns. Blake's been selling properties to shell companies that trace back to Harold Blackwood's business associates. What kind of properties? The kind that exist mostly on paper. I think your future father-in-law and your fiancé's boyfriend have been running a real estate scam, using fake buyers to inflate property values. The pieces clicked into place like a puzzle solving itself. The marriage contract wasn't just about control, it was about liability. If Sierra could get legal access to my finances, she could use my clean credit history and legitimate income to legitimize their fraudulent transactions. How illegal are we talking? I asked. Federal wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, the kind of illegal that comes with orange jumpsuits and federal prison time. And Sierra. Hard to prove direct involvement, but she's been using her position in HR to run background checks on potential victims. That's misuse of company resources and violation of privacy laws. I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Sierra thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Time to show her the difference. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Perfect weather for the summer bash. I spent an hour in my garage preparing what Mick had started calling Operation Sunshine, because we were going to shed some light on Sierra and Blake's activities. The festival was in full swing when I arrived, Main Street blocked off and filled with booths selling everything from handmade jewelry to questionable barbecue. I spotted Sierra immediately. She was wearing a new sundress that probably cost more than my truck payment, standing next to the Morrison construction booth and chatting with coworkers. Blake was there too, of course, looking like he'd stepped out of a menswear catalog. He had his hand on Sierra's lower back, a gesture that would look casual to anyone who didn't know they were supposed to be strangers. I approached slowly, stopping at various booths to buy a lemonade and chat with neighbors. Mr. Tibbet was working the Historical Society booth, selling old photographs and gossip with equal enthusiasm. "Ethan," he called out, "heard you had some tire trouble the other night." "Nothing I couldn't handle," I said, loud enough for several people to hear. Funny thing about vandalism. It usually says more about the person doing it than the victim. I saw Sierra's head turn at the sound of my voice, her smile faltering slightly when she realized I was working the crowd like a politician. Blake whispered something in her ear, and they started moving toward the beer garden. Time for Phase 1. I intercepted them at the Morrison construction booth, where half my coworkers were gathered around a table covered with company literature and safety awards. "Sierra, Blake," I said loudly, extending my hand to Blake like we were old friends. "Fancy meeting you here. Together." Blake's handshake was firm, but his eyes were wary. "Ethan, how are you holding up?" "Oh, you know how it is. Discovering your fiancé has been lying to you really puts things in perspective." I kept my voice conversational, but several people nearby had stopped their conversations to listen. Sierra's face flushed. "Ethan, please don't make a scene." "A scene? I'm just making conversation with my fiancé and her. What would you call your relationship, Blake? Business partners?" "We've done some real estate transactions," Blake said carefully. "I'll bet you have." I turned to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Blake here is quite the entrepreneur. Specializes in properties that exist mostly on paper, from what I hear." Blake's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos from the motel. This one was taken Thursday night at the Riverside. Funny how business meetings work these days. The crowd was definitely listening now. I saw Joe Martinez pushing through the people, her eyes bright with interest. Behind her, Linda appeared. When had she gotten to town? With a manila folder in her hands. Sierra grabbed my arm. "Ethan, stop this right now." "Stop what? Telling the truth?" I gently removed her hand from my arm. "See, the thing is, I've been doing some research. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Linda stepped forward and handed me the folder. These are public records, she announced to the crowd. Property transactions, business filings, court documents, all perfectly legal to access and share. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Blake Harper, real estate agent, has been selling properties to fake buyers in order to inflate values and collect fraudulent commissions. The fake buyers trace back to shell companies owned by Harold Blackwood, who happens to be Sierra's father. Blake started to back away, but the crowd had formed a loose circle around us. "This is harassment," he said. "This is accountability," I replied. Sierra, as an HR professional, has been using company resources to run background checks on potential victims, identifying people with good credit and stable incomes who could be manipulated into participating in the scheme. Sierra's face was now completely white. "That's not true." "It's all documented." I held up more papers. "The marriage contract your parents wanted me to sign would have given you access to my credit, my income, and my legal liability. I would have been the perfect fall guy when the federal investigators started asking questions." The crowd was murmuring now, a low buzz of shock and excitement. I saw several people taking photos with their phones, and someone was definitely recording video. Blake made his move then, pushing through the crowd toward the parking area. But Mick was waiting for him, arms crossed and looking like a mountain that had decided to take human form. "Going somewhere, pretty boy?" Mick asked. Blake tried to dodge around him, but Mick was surprisingly quick for a big man. Blake stumbled, crashed into a booth selling handmade soaps, and went down in a tangle of limbs and lavender-scented merchandise. The crowd laughed, and someone started applauding. Sierra was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Ethan, please. We can work this out." "We?" I looked at her with something that might have been pity. "There is no we, Sierra. There never was. I was just a mark, a convenient target with a steady job and clean credit." I turned to the crowd, many of whom I'd known for years. "I want everyone to know that I'm grateful this came out before the wedding. Imagine how embarrassing it would have been to find out your spouse was a criminal after you'd already signed the papers." The laughter was louder now, and definitely not friendly toward Sierra and Blake. Small towns don't forgive being made fools of, and Sierra had just been exposed as someone who thought her neighbors were too stupid to figure out her scheme. Blake had extracted himself from the soap booth and was limping toward his BMW, Sierra close behind. I let them go, for now. The real reckoning was still coming. Linda appeared at my elbow. "Nice work," she said quietly, "but you know this isn't over." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "They started this game. I'm going to finish it." As Sierra and Blake drove away, the crowd gradually dispersed, but the damage was done. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know the story, and it would grow in the telling. Sierra's reputation was ruined, Blake's business was finished, and Harold's involvement would soon be common knowledge. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Public humiliation was just the appetizer. The main course was still to come. Sunday morning brought three things: a hangover from celebrating at the Anchor, a voicemail from Sierra's lawyer brother Darren, and the satisfying knowledge that my phone had been buzzing with congratulations since dawn. Apparently half the town had been suspicious of Blake Harper's too-good-to-be-true real estate deals, and the other half had never liked Sierra's attitude. The voicemail from Darren was predictably pompous. "Ethan, this is Darren Blackwood. We need to discuss your behavior yesterday. What you did was potentially libelous, and my family is considering legal action. Call me." I deleted it without calling back. If Darren wanted to threaten me, he could do it in person. Instead, I called Linda, who was staying at the Riverside Motel, the same place where Sierra and Blake had been conducting their business meetings. She decided to extend her weekend visit to help me plan the next phase. "Sleep well?" I asked when she answered. "Like a baby. A baby who spent the evening researching federal fraud statutes and finding more evidence of your ex-fiancé's criminal activities." "Ex-fiancé? I like the sound of that." "You should. I've been digging deeper into the shell company connections, and it's worse than we thought. Blake and Harold have been running this scam for at least 2 years, involving dozens of properties and probably millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions." I whistled low. "How many victims?" "At least 20 that I can identify so far. Mostly young couples looking to buy their first homes, getting suckered into paying inflated prices for properties that aren't worth half what they're asking." The anger that had been simmering in my chest since Thursday night flared into something hotter. It was one thing to target me. I was an adult who should have seen the signs. But scamming young families trying to build their lives? That was unforgivable. "What's our next move?" I asked. "Legally, we turn everything over to the FBI and let them handle it. Practically, We make sure Blake and Sierra understand that their comfortable little world is about to collapse. I vote for practically. I figured you would. Meet me at Murphy's in an hour, and bring Mick. We're going to need his particular skill set. Murphy's diner was busier than usual for a Sunday morning, probably because half the town wanted to rehash yesterday's drama over coffee and pancakes. I nodded to several people who called out greetings. Apparently, exposing your cheating fiancé as a criminal makes you popular in certain circles. Linda was already there, sharing a booth with Mick and looking like a lawyer who'd found a particularly interesting loophole. She'd spread papers across the table in organized stacks, each one labeled with neat handwriting. "Gentlemen," she said as I sat down, "welcome to the war room." Mick grinned. "I like her," he told me. "She thinks like a criminal, but talks like a lawyer. Flattery will get you everywhere." Linda pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. "Here's what we know. Blake's been using fake buyers to purchase properties at inflated prices, then selling them to real buyers at even higher prices. The fake buyers are shell companies controlled by Harold Blackwood, who's been laundering the money through his legitimate business interests." "And Sierra's role?" I asked. "She's been using her HR position to identify targets, people with good credit, stable employment, and enough savings for a down payment. She runs background checks under the guise of employment verification for Harold's companies, then passes the information to Blake." That's why she wanted the marriage contract, I realized. My credit score, my income, my clean background. I would have been the perfect fake buyer. Exactly. And when the scheme eventually collapsed, you would have been legally responsible for the debts while Sierra and Blake disappeared with the money. The waitress refilled my coffee, and I noticed her listening intently to our conversation. Small towns, everyone was invested in the story now. "So what's the plan?" Mick asked. Linda smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "We're going to apply pressure at every possible point until something breaks. Ethan, you're going to focus on Sierra. Make it clear that you know everything and that her options are limited. Mick, you're going to have a conversation with Blake about the consequences of targeting innocent families." "What kind of conversation?" Mick asked. "The kind where you explain that defrauding young couples trying to buy their first homes is the sort of thing that makes certain people very angry. The kind of angry that doesn't go away just because someone says they're sorry." I looked at my sister with new respect. "And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to pay a visit to Harold Blackwood and explain that he has two choices: cooperate with the federal investigation that's coming, or spend his retirement years in federal prison." "There's already a federal investigation?" "There will be by tomorrow morning. I've been in contact with a friend at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They're very interested in what we've uncovered." We spent the next hour refining the plan, identifying pressure points and timing our moves for maximum impact. By the time we left Murphy's, I felt like a general preparing for the final battle of a long war. The first shot was fired that afternoon when I drove to Sierra's apartment. She'd moved out of our house sometime Saturday night, probably while I was celebrating at the Anchor. The complex was one of those generic places that tried to look upscale but fooled nobody, all beige siding and fake shutters. Sierra answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the loss of her carefully constructed facade. "What do you want?" she asked. "To talk. 5 minutes." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was barely furnished. A couch, a coffee table, boxes stacked against the walls. It looked like a temporary refuge, not a home. "Nice place," I said. "Very transitional. Say what you came to say and leave." I sat on the couch without being invited, making myself comfortable. "I know about the shell companies. I know about the fake buyers. I know about the background checks you've been running on potential victims." Sierra's face went pale, but she didn't deny it. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. Federal wire fraud, money laundering, misuse of company resources, conspiracy to commit fraud. The FBI is going to have a field day with this." "The FBI?" Sierra's voice was barely a whisper. "They'll be in touch soon. Probably tomorrow, maybe Tuesday if they're busy." I leaned back against the couch cushions. "The question is, what are you going to tell them?" "I want a lawyer. Smart. You're going to need a good one. Federal crimes carry serious sentences, especially when they involve targeting families and young couples." Sierra sank into a chair across from me, her hands shaking. "This wasn't my idea." "But you participated. You used your position to identify victims. You tried to manipulate me into becoming part of the scheme." I kept my voice level, conversational. "The FBI won't care whose idea it was. They'll care about what you did." "What do you want?" I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to face the truth about what you've done. And I want you to know that the quiet guy you thought you could manipulate is capable of fighting back." I stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Sierra, you might want to call your parents. I have a feeling they're about to have a very interesting conversation with my sister." Outside, my phone buzzed with a text from Mick. "Had that conversation with Pretty Boy. He's very concerned about his health and safety. Might be looking to relocate soon." I smiled and texted back. "Excellent. Phase 1 complete." The next text was from Linda. "Harold's lawyer wants to meet. I think we got their attention." As I drove home through the quiet Sunday streets of Morrison, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but the calm certainty that comes from knowing you're on the right side of a fight. Sierra, Blake, and Harold had made their choices. Now they were going to live with the consequences. And I was just getting started. Monday morning brought FBI agents to Morrison Construction. I watched from my office window as 2 people in dark suits walked into the building, their presence causing a ripple of whispers and nervous glances throughout the office. Within an hour, Sierra's desk had been cleared out and her computer confiscated. My phone rang just as I was finishing my morning coffee. Linda's voice was crisp with professional satisfaction. "The dominoes are falling," she said. "Harold's lawyer called this morning. They want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Harold's ready to give up Blake and throw Sierra under the bus to save his own skin." Family loyalty at its finest. It gets better. Blake tried to flee town last night, but his car broke down on Route 1. Mick's handiwork, I assume. I smiled. Mick has many talents. Blake's currently sitting in the county lockup on charges of attempting to leave the state while under investigation. His lawyer is making noise about harassment and intimidation. Any truth to that? None whatsoever. Blake's car suffered a mechanical failure. These things happen to people who don't maintain their vehicles properly. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and visits from coworkers who wanted to know if the rumors were true. By lunch, everyone at Morrison Construction knew that Sierra had been fired and was under federal investigation. The gossip mill was working overtime, and each retelling made the story more dramatic. I was eating a sandwich at my desk when Darren Blackwood walked into my office. Sierra's brother looked like he'd aged 10 years since the weekend, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "Have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Though I should mention that this conversation might be recorded. Company policy. Darren's eyes flicked to the security camera in the corner of my office. "This is about Sierra." I figured. "She's made some mistakes, but she doesn't deserve to go to federal prison." "Mistakes?" I set down my sandwich and looked at him directly. "Your sister used her position to identify victims for a fraud scheme that's stolen millions of dollars from young families." "That's not a mistake, Darren. That's a crime." "She was manipulated. Blake and my father convinced her." "Sierra's a grown woman who made her own choices. She chose to run illegal background checks. She chose to participate in the fraud. She chose to try to manipulate me into becoming part of the scheme." Darren leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What do you want? Money? We can make this worth your while." I stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. "Are you seriously trying to bribe me? In my office, on camera, while your family is already under federal investigation for financial crimes?" "This isn't a joke, Ethan." "You're right, it's not." I stood up, my amusement fading. "Your sister destroyed our relationship, tried to steal my financial future, and participated in a scheme that hurt innocent people, and your response is to offer me money to keep quiet? I'm trying to help my family." "Your family should have thought about consequences before they decided to become criminals." I walked to the door and opened it. "This conversation is over, Darren, and if you ever try to bribe me again, I'll add it to the federal case file." He left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. That afternoon, I met Linda and Mick at the Anchor to plan the final phase of our operation. The bar was quiet, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the ancient television above the bar. "The FBI is moving fast," Linda reported. "They've seized Harold's business records, Blake's real estate files, and Sierra's computer. The evidence is overwhelming." "What about Sierra herself?" I asked. "House arrest pending trial. Her passport's been confiscated, and she's not allowed to leave the county." Mick raised his beer. "Sounds like justice to me." "Not quite yet," I said. "There's one more thing I need to do." Linda raised an eyebrow. "What kind of thing?" The kind that ensures Sierra understands exactly what she's lost and why. Ethan, Linda's voice carried a warning. Don't do anything stupid. You've won. Don't give them ammunition to use against you. I'm not going to hurt her. I just want to have one final conversation. Famous last words, Mick muttered. But I'd already made up my mind. Sierra needed to hear the truth, not from lawyers or FBI agents, but from me. She needed to understand that her actions had consequences beyond legal penalties. That evening, I drove to Sierra's apartment complex. Her Honda was in the parking lot, and I could see lights in her windows. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, organizing my thoughts and preparing for what might be our last conversation. Sierra answered the door wearing the same sweatpants from Sunday, but she looked worse, hollow-eyed and thin, like someone who hadn't been eating or sleeping. The apartment behind her was even more sparse than before, just the bare minimum of furniture and possessions. The FBI came to see me today, she said without preamble. I heard? They know everything, about the background checks, about Blake, about the fake buyers. Her voice was flat, emotionless. My lawyer says I'm looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. That's what happens when you commit federal crimes. She stepped aside to let me in, and I noticed her hands were shaking. The apartment smelled like takeout food and despair. I never meant for it to go this far, she said. What did you think would happen? That you could defraud people indefinitely without consequences? I thought... She trailed off, then tried again. Blake said it was victimless, just manipulating property values, not really hurting anyone. 20 families, Sierra. 20 young couples who paid inflated prices for homes that weren't worth what they paid. Some of them are underwater on their mortgages now, trapped in houses they can't afford and can't sell. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you've done? I sat down on her couch, making myself comfortable. You didn't just commit crimes, Sierra. You betrayed every principle you claimed to believe in. You used your position to hurt the exact people you were supposed to protect. I was scared, she whispered. Blake said if I didn't help, he'd tell everyone about us. He said it would ruin my career. So you decided to ruin other people's lives instead. She started crying then, not the pretty tears of someone who expected sympathy, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of their mistakes. I'm sorry, she said through the tears. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You lied to me for months, maybe years. You tried to manipulate me into a marriage that would have destroyed my life. You vandalized my truck when I started asking questions. That was Blake's idea. Stop. I held up a hand. Stop blaming Blake for your choices. You're not a victim, Sierra. You're a perpetrator who got caught. The silence stretched between us, broken only by her quiet crying and the sound of traffic outside. Finally, I stood up to leave. The FBI will probably offer you a plea deal if you cooperate fully. Take it. Tell them everything about Blake and your father, and maybe you'll only serve 3 or 4 years instead of 10. What about us? She asked. Is there any chance? There is no us, I said firmly. There never really was. I was just a mark, remember? A convenient target with good credit and a steady job. I walked to the door, then paused. Sierra, when you're sitting in federal prison, thinking about how you got there, remember this. You had choices. Every step of the way, you had choices. And you chose to lie, to steal, and to hurt innocent people. That's not bad luck or manipulation or circumstances beyond your control. That's who you chose to be. I left her crying in her empty apartment and drove home through the quiet streets of Morrison. My phone was buzzing with messages. Updates from Linda about the federal investigation, congratulations from coworkers, and even a few interview requests from reporters who'd heard about the story. I ignored them all. The important work was done. Sierra, Blake, and Harold would face justice through the legal system. The victims would get restitution from seized assets, and I would get something more valuable than revenge, the knowledge that I'd stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. At home, I sat in my kitchen with a beer and looked around at the house that was finally truly mine again. No marriage contracts, no hidden agendas, no lies masquerading as love. Just peace, quiet, and the satisfaction of a job well done. Outside, Mr. Tibbet was working in his garden, probably hoping to catch some gossip about the day's events. I waved at him through the window, and he waved back with obvious disappointment that I wasn't coming out to chat. Some things, at least, never changed. And in a week that had seen my entire life turned upside down and rebuilt from scratch, that consistency felt like a gift. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what came next. Tonight, I'd enjoy the silence of a house that was finally free of secrets. 3 months later, I was drinking coffee at Murphy's Diner when the morning news reported that Sierra Blackwood had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for her role in a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme. Blake Harper got 7 years, and Harold Blackwood got 5 plus restitution to the victims. Mick slid into the booth across from me, grinning at the television. Justice served with a side of scrambled eggs. Something like that. The waitress refilled our coffee cups and lingered long enough to eavesdrop. Morrison was still talking about the scandal. Probably would be for years. I'd become something of a local celebrity, the guy who'd exposed the corruption and stood up to the criminals. "So what's next for the famous Ethan Rowley?" Mick asked. I pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Rowley Investigations, specializing in financial fraud and background verification. Mick's eyes widened. "You're starting your own business?" Linda helped me get licensed. Turns out there's a market for someone who knows how to dig up the truth about people's finances and backgrounds. I sipped my coffee. Amazing how many businesses want to verify that their partners aren't running criminal enterprises. And the personal side? Any prospects on the romantic front? I thought about the paralegal from Linda's firm who'd been helping with the federal case, the librarian who'd started finding excuses to chat when I came in for research, the contractor who'd hired me to investigate a potential business partner and had suggested dinner to discuss the results. "Maybe," I said. "But next time, I'm doing a full background check before the first date." Mick laughed. "Once burned, twice careful." Something like that. Outside Murphy's window, Morrison went about its business under a clear autumn sky. Mr. Tibbet was walking his ancient beagle, probably hoping to stumble across some new drama to report. A young couple was looking at the house that had just gone up for sale across from the diner, their first home, judging by their excitement and careful examination of every detail. I watched them for a moment, remembering other young couples who'd had their dreams manipulated by people like Sierra and Blake. The federal restitution would help, but some damage couldn't be undone with money. My phone buzzed with a text from a potential client in Portland, another business owner who suspected his partner of financial impropriety, another chance to uncover the truth and protect innocent people from predators. I finished my coffee and stood up to leave. Duty calls. "Go get 'em, detective," Mick said. As I walked to my truck, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The quiet guy who'd been targeted for manipulation had become someone who specialized in exposing manipulators. The project manager who'd focused on construction timelines was now building cases against financial criminals. Sierra had been right about one thing. I had changed, but not in the way she'd expected. I drove toward Portland with the radio playing and the windows down, heading toward a new case and a future built on truth instead of lies. Behind me, Morrison grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but it would always be home, the place where I'd learned that sometimes the underdog doesn't just survive, sometimes the underdog wins.